everyone, and welcome to another episode of Impactful Conversations. We are back after a brief break, and very, very excited for the episode today and to bring it to you today. Before I introduce my guest, I just want to thank you all once again for the part that you're playing in the community. We just finished off our the Energy Expert Story series that we just did. We just finished that off, which went absolutely, incredibly well, and very grateful for the interactions that we had there. And we're looking forward to the next few episodes that we have lined up in store. And the first of which is with Denislav Marinov, who is the founder of Amnova Tech. Absolutely thrilled to have him here. He and I have quite a long history together. I think I last saw him more than 5 years ago, so I'm quite thrilled to have him here on the platform, at least virtually, with the times that we currently live in. Denislav, thank you so much for joining us. It's an absolute privilege and an honor to be able to talk to you today. How are you doing this morning?
Hi, Tafa. Thank you so much for the invitation. It really is an honor to be on this platform. I hope I can add value to your listeners. I'm doing great. It's a bit of a cloudy morning here in Johannesburg, but no complaints on my side, just making the most of the weather. But yeah, everything's good, and thanks again for having me.
No, cool, man. Absolutely, thrilled and excited to be able to chat to you today. It is a cloudy morning. It's a bit strange, actually. I'm not sure. Like looking outside the window now, I'm not really sure what's happening. I thought spring was springing, but apparently not just yet. So
Yeah.
we'll wait for that. But Denislav, just to get started, help me to let the listeners get to know you a little bit better. So give me a shout. Where were you born? Where did you grow up, and what are you passionate about?
Sure. So a lot of people might hear from my name, Denislav. It's not a very typical South African name. So I'm actually born, I was born in South Africa to immigrant parents from Bulgaria. So my parents are Bulgarian, but I was born here in South Africa, in Johannesburg, where I've spent my whole life, born and raised. I went to St. Stithians College, Boys College, for high school. I've stayed in Johannesburg. I went to Cape Town to do my studies at UCT, so I spent a few years there. But you could say I'm a Joe Burger at heart. And I was born the year my parents moved over to South Africa. I was born, so there must have been something in the water here, because they've been trying for a while, and only once they came to South Africa did I appear in the picture. So yeah.
So we're very glad to have you, and I'm smiling because I'm also a Joe Bigger at heart as well. So
Yeah.
I can totally relate. So diving right into it, right? I want to talk about your journey, your entrepreneurship journey specifically. So you actually founded what you call DVM Designs back when you were in high school, which is absolutely incredible, right? So first, tell me about how your entrepreneurship instinct developed in the first place.
Yeah, well, I believe that entrepreneurship and the entrepreneurial mindset, it's not actually something that one learns. It's something you're born with, because at its core, entrepreneurship is just problem solving. You see a problem in society and you want to come up with a solution to address this problem. And as a byproduct, it's good if you make some money on that solution, right? So that's entrepreneurship, and everyone that's born is born with these innate problem solving skills. And so I wouldn't say I was necessarily born an entrepreneur. I think it's something that's natural to everyone. Perhaps just my background and the community I grew up in kind of fostered this entrepreneurial spirit and allowed it to flourish. And so for me, I've always been very passionate and interested in technology and its potential to produce meaningful impact. And in high school, I was very fortunate to stumble across 3D printing. I've always stayed at the forefront of new tech developments, reading up on what was the hot topic. At that point, it was kind of 3D printing, and I started to explore it, and I was instantly mesmerized and blown away by the technology that would enable one to take an image from their mind and actually materialize it in a matter of hours. So that for me was just phenomenal. You can take an image and produce it. And I just realized, wow, the opportunities for this technology are groundbreaking. We could really change up South Africa as we know it by making these technologies more accessible. And I started to explore the technology and found that there wasn't a huge community in South Africa for 3D printing or any markets or industries for that matter. And so as an entrepreneur, I guess I decided, well, if there's no community, I might as well help build one. And that's when I started investing more time and energy into 3D printing. Of course, there was a community of hobbyists that worked with 3D printing, but I was more interested in the industrial applications and how we can use it for manufacturing, for startups, for rapid prototyping, for a variety of applications. And yeah, I just started taking off from there. I was fortunate enough to get my first 3D printer kit in grade 9 or 10. It was as a birthday present. And being a kid, I had to assemble it myself. And wow, it was one of the most intimidating processes I've ever been through, because a lot of the parts I've never seen in my life before. And here I'm expected to produce this functioning machine. But going through that process, I built such a deep understanding of what goes into producing an operational machine, such as a 3D printer. What does this part do? Why do we use this part? Why did this part blow up when I plugged it into 24 volts, whatever, you know? So I developed a really good understanding of how 3D printing works, and very quickly reverse engineered the printer itself and identified a lot of great things about the technology, but also a lot of areas that were lacking in terms of quality, precision, speed, and strength. And being a scientist and engineer, I guess, at heart, I wanted to find ways to make it better. Yeah. And that's where kind of my journey in entrepreneurship started, where I wanted to develop these technologies further, given that I knew the potential they had to change industry. How could I develop them, make them more accessible, make them more quality production units, so that we can distribute them throughout the country? And yeah, it just took off from there. And to date, it's been probably over 8 years now that I've been working in the 3D printing space. In high school, it was more of a freelancing kind of initiative where I just did designs for friends and family and did some small 3D prints here and there. But towards the end of my matric, I started to get my first industrial clients, which then opened the doors to this whole new market of 3D printing applications. Yeah.
So I love your definition of entrepreneurship, right? That at the heart of it, it's about problem solving. Absolutely love that definition. I think, you know, it's such a different way to look at it. And I love the fact that you've referenced societal problems as well within that. And obviously, you know, there has to be a profit making, you know, in order for it to actually be sustainable and for it to continue into the long term. But you know, and we will get to the 3D printing specifics a little bit later on in the chat. But talk to me about your time at school. How did your education shape that entrepreneurial instinct, as it were, that you had at the time?
Yeah, I must admit, one thing I really loved about Saints was the extracurricular activities and support that happened there. So it was actually what was then called the boardroom, which was like a society for students interested in business and startups and running a business. So it was this ecosystem that was trying to foster students with that kind of mentality of creating sustainable businesses. Yeah. And it was run by Eric Hauptfleisch, who's an incredible teacher as well. I'm really grateful for the impact he had on my entrepreneurial journey. So he was heading up that club. And through that club, I got exposed to a variety of industry professionals, one of which was actually the reason I started prior to 3D printing. I was in the kind of design space. I always wanted to be an architect, actually, funny enough. And so one of the guest speakers we had was an architect, and he spoke about his architectural firm and business and the softwares they used. And he mentioned one open source free software called Blender. And immediately after that conversation, I looked into Blender and I was like, oh, wow, this is such a fantastic software. And through there, I started actually doing interior designs, architectural designs, which then led into designing products for 3D printing. And so that actually, I can trace it back to the actual event where this whole kind of design into 3D printing journey started. And that was through one of these societies at Saints. Apart from that, you know, you're exposed to such a diverse crowd of people at school as well, which was quite fantastic. So I learned a lot from my peers, and the teachers were phenomenal. But at the same time, I think the schooling system in general does tend to lack in certain areas where perhaps, as I mentioned, we're born with this entrepreneurial spirit. And the question is not so much how do we learn to become entrepreneurs, but it's how are we unlearn to become entrepreneurs. And to a certain extent, schooling does that, where it removes a lot of these skills that we have as innate entrepreneurs. It kind of hinders some of that talent. Not any school in particular, I think just the schooling system in general. And that's one thing we're focusing on as well with 3D printing and changing up the education space, which I can probably touch on later. But it's how do we change this educational system such that it's more conducive to this problem solving based approach, as opposed to just reading and regurgitating information. But still, Saints was a fantastic school. I'm very honored and privileged that I got the opportunity to go there, and it's definitely set me up for success.
Yeah, I mean, I think, having gone to the school, I can definitely echo that 100% without a doubt. But I think you raised some interesting points, around how we can rethink the education system, particularly pertaining to what you've spoken about already. So I'm quite keen to dive into that. But before we talk about the education system, let's talk about your education first. Why a BSc in physics and chemistry? So, what sort of went into that decision? I suppose probably from mid-grade 11 to beginning of matric, as it were. What was the sort of thinking behind that? If you're like me, it was a simple, well, I enjoyed these subjects, and so this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, or rather, this is why I'm thinking of doing what I'm doing. And then, the decision to actually do it, there's a little bit more, that comes into that. But yeah, I'm quite curious to know why, a Bachelor of Science in Physics and Chemistry.
Yeah, well, from a young age, I've always wanted to be a theoretical physicist, actually. So I used to read a lot of science books. I actually have like a few science encyclopedias here in the office. So I've always been very passionate about understanding the underlying mechanisms of the universe and breaking everything down to the first principles. So yeah, just deconstructing everything, understanding how it works. And there was this amazing physicist as well, Michio Kaku. I used to watch a lot of his shows I think it was on Discovery at that time, about physics, about the future of physics and technology. And I was just so blown away by that. So I've always been very passionate and interested in physics. At the same time, I always had a very creative side to me as well. And I was quite interested in architecture. And as I mentioned, that was actually what I initially wanted to study, was architecture. And then I transitioned a bit to mechatronics. And then finally, I transitioned back to physics. And the reason being, I guess, similarly to entrepreneurship, how entrepreneurship at its core is problem solving within the context of society and economy. Physics is also at its core problem solving, but with respect to the very fundamental laws of nature. So I guess in essence, I just really enjoy problem solving, and physics seemed like the natural choice for that, because with physics, we just question and probe and try to deconstruct all these ideas that we have and trying to prove them, or rather disprove them. And that's what I love so much about science, is that in science, there's a misconception that we try to prove things. In reality, we actually try very diligently to disprove things. And that's the whole point of the scientific method, where we have hypotheses and questions, and we actually try to disprove them. And only if through considerable effort we fail to disprove them do we actually take things as fact. And I found that quite a refreshing approach. Whereas nowadays, a lot of people try to prove concepts. With science, you try to disprove it. And so for physics, it was such a foundational subject for me. I felt that if I could learn and master physics, you could pretty much jump into any other industry thereafter, because you've developed those critical thinking skills. And so after physics, the next natural derivation is kind of chemistry. And so I've always been fascinated by materials as well. And so physics and chemistry merged quite well together. They complemented each other. And then the next natural step after chemistry would be something like, I don't know, biology. Then you can go into computer sciences and so forth. I kind of stopped at physics and chemistry, with a great deal of math as well, which was involved in physics. And I really enjoyed that. And following that undergrad, I did my honors in material science, which essentially was the merger of physics and chemistry. Because within material science, you investigate materials, new ways of manufacturing, and developing these new complex materials from the intermolecular level all the way to your macroscopic kind of engineering applications, which for me was just incredibly exciting. And it was just a merger of physics and chemistry. And that was my career. I went into physics not necessarily for the career benefits, but rather for the personal growth and critical thinking skills that I developed, knowing very well that once I leave physics, I could pretty much explore any other field of interest throughout my life.
Yeah, and I think I really love the thought process that you went through, into making that decision. And equally so, I think, and I do find the scientific method quite fascinating. I think it clicked for me once. I think it was in a first year class in physics when I realized that actually we weren't trying to prove concepts. We were actually trying to disprove their existence. And it was such an interesting way of, flipping the way we think about it, where actually, we typically try and say, is this true? Try to prove it's true, rather than say, actually try and disprove it and see, if you can disprove it using, the relative methods that can be available for you to do that, scientifically. So talk to me then about the inception of Amnova Tech. So from DVM Designs to Amnova Tech, what's the transition there, if any, and what's the thinking behind that?
Yeah, so DVM Designs, as I said, kind of started out as a more freelancing initiative. So DVM are my initials. And so I used that throughout high school and through my, I think, first and second year of university. It was under the name DVM Designs. But then as the business started growing and I started getting more industrial clients, more serious kind of jobs, there was a need to formalize and structure the business in greater depth. And so hence the transition to Amnova Tech. So Amnova, AM stands for additive manufacturing, and then Nova means new. So it's a new way of additive manufacturing. And so additive manufacturing is the industrial term for 3D printing. And so hence Amnova was born because there was this need for a more regulated business, one that had structure, one that had, to get onto all the vendor lists, etc. We needed to meet certain criteria. And I decided also what I'm trying to build is bigger than just me. And I didn't want the company to be just associated with me as an individual. Hence the move away from DVM as a personal brand to Amnova Tech, which is this company that will exist far after I'm gone as well. The whole intention was to create this system that even once I leave, we have an impactful business that's still producing change. Hence the shift to Amnova Tech.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait to talk a little bit more about what it is that you're doing there. I think it's I love the AM Nova. That's cool. I never actually noticed that. That's really...
Yeah, it was so actually it was my dad. He came up with the name. I was thinking of different names. I initially wanted to call it Adelace. Ada, because one of my icons is she's called Ada Lovelace, and she's de facto kind of the first programmer ever in the 19th century. She was actually working on the first kind of mechanical systems which you could essentially call computational devices. And so you could actually say she was the first programmer back then. A phenomenal mathematician, but history hasn't emphasized the role she played in computation today. And so she's been a huge inspiration to me, and I wanted to call the company to have some homage to her, so hence the name Adelace. But after a bit of research, a lot of that, so some of those names were taken, and also at the fear of sounding like a lingerie brand, we decided to move away more to something like Amnova, which had the AM and the Nova, which is essentially what we're trying to do: develop new ways of manufacturing. So it just fitted really well with the company.
Yeah, lovely, absolutely. I mean, really, really, really lovely name, I think, and wonderful thought process behind it. And can't wait to dig into that, into more about what you're actually doing there, and the thinking and the process and the purpose behind it. But we started off, obviously, as we normally do on this podcast, quite fast. We dived right into your life story, but let's maybe tone it down a little bit. You are a gifted musician. I remember all I remember is you playing piano. I think in chapel services or ceremonies and so on. Um, what is your favorite piece to play? Piano piece to play in particular. And how long have you been playing piano, actually?
Yeah, well, I think gifted musician is a bit of an exaggeration, but I certainly do enjoy my music. I've been playing piano, what is it, for about 17 years now. I started quite young. I must confess, the last few years, my I have reduced in ability given once I entered university, there was a bunch of new responsibilities and access to a piano was far more limited. So I still play, but not to the same level that I used to. But yeah, music has been such a central part of my life and my entrepreneurial journey as well. The reason being is having to perform in front of a group of people is an incredibly intense and nerve-wracking experience. Having to play piano, and so I think having to do that at a young age, it developed a great deal of confidence and character when having to perform. And I think that's kind of translated into who I am today as a person. The level of confidence I have to approach potential partners, to approach investors, to be able to ask for exactly what we need. That's a very important skill. And I think something like piano helped inculcate that confidence within me. And so I'm forever grateful for that ability to perform. Because naturally I'm a bit of an introvert. I really value my alone time. I value to be with myself, to think, to reflect. But then having to perform and play piano kind of developed the more, you could say, extroverted side of me. So if you ask my friends, you could say I'm quite outspoken at loud in times. But very much balancing out this more introverted side of me. So very much piano, huge part of my life. I would say I was classically trained, so classical piano. But my heart is very much with the jazz side of things. So your kind of your classics, your Miles Davis, and your local legends like Hugh Masekela, your Fela Kutis, all those kind of icons. I absolutely adore. Yeah. So in terms of my favorite pieces to play, my funnest piece to play is anything by George Gershwin. He has some fantastic short, fun pieces to play. My favorite is Prelude Number 1. So yeah, I would say that's my favorite. The most fulfilling piece to play, and here's a mouthful, it's Rachmaninoff, his Etude Tableau in G minor, Op 33, number 8. Check out that piece. It is a phenomenal piece of classical music. I absolutely love playing that.
We'll put a link to both of the pieces in the show notes for people to go and check that out. And thanks very much for sharing that with us. And I think I'll challenge what you said. I think you are a gifted musician. You don't lose the gift. You might not exercise it, as much, but you don't lose it. So I'm quite curious. Everybody's lives have been turned upside down since the 20 something of March 2020, especially in South Africa anyway. What is a typical day in your life currently? If you walk me through it from beginning to end, just talk me through, what is a typical day in your life?
Yeah, well, I must admit, yes, currently we have quite a few big jobs that are going on. So my daily plan has kind of been turned on its head the last 2 months or so. But essentially, I'd wake up early in the morning, or not early, but 7:30, 8. That's my usual kind of wake up time. I have my nice black coffee, no sugar, no milk, just to remind me. I really enjoy the bitterness of a good coffee. Have my coffee. I go through my task list for the day. I reevaluate it to see which tasks need to be moved up in terms of priority. And then I take a few minutes of just a break for mindfulness, just to reevaluate, to center myself, and to plan for the day ahead. And then I would just start working, and I would work throughout the day, have a bunch of meetings, work on the technical side of things that we do at Amnova, work on some of the business development stuff. I do fit every day, though. I'm quite diligent in having an hour for exercise. So that involves doing a run, doing some strengthening, doing a lot of stretching. I'm quite I used to do taekwondo in university, and so I'm trying to pick that up again. So trying to build up the strength and flexibility for that, and then continue working after that. Have dinner, and then I set aside time for meditation in the evenings as well. Again, just to recenter myself, because with all that's going on, all the chaos and madness and the workload, it's very important to have these checkpoints where you just recenter yourself, and you just reevaluate what you're doing and whether you're on the right track. So I make sure to do that every day. It's been a huge help for me, just to stay sane. Really, is to have that time for meditation and reflection, and then I would continue working until I kind of go to sleep in the evening, and then the process would start again.
Yeah, I really love the point around, setting aside some time, as I think you use the word checkpoint. That's actually really, really important. I think, anybody listening to this, would agree with that. Particularly, I think we all sort of underestimate the impact of the last, almost coming on to 18, 20 months or so, on our well-being in our lives and so on. The shift in the day-to-day, I think, is something that we all need to, adapt and live into. So I think really appreciate, you sharing that with us and sharing some of your techniques and, the sort of things that you go through. It's quite important, to really take stock, particularly at the end of the day. A lot of times we take stock at the beginning, but then as the day sort of wanes on, we sort of end up running on fumes, as it were.
Yeah.
So I think it's really, really important to do that. Sure.
I think the end goal is to actually just exist in a continuous state of mindfulness, within anything you do. So we shouldn't really have checkpoints. We should just exist in a state of mindfulness. Unfortunately, the environment we live in is quite, there's a lot of distractions, there's a lot of work, and it's quite difficult to maintain that level of mindfulness. So I'm certainly practicing and training, trying to get to that point. But until then, it's important just to have checkpoints throughout the day, just to step back, reflect, until eventually you achieve a state of continuous mindfulness. That for me is incredibly important, is this concept of continuous mindfulness. My biggest fear is kind of reverting to this autonomous headspace, where you just kind of work mindlessly. That's perhaps one of my biggest fears. And so I make a very conscious effort to be mindful, to meditate, to reflect, and to just ensure that I'm being mindful as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that's super, super important and quite profound. And so thanks for sharing that. A bit of a strange question, this one, but here we go anyway. If you could live anywhere in the world, not in South Africa.
No.
Because I knew you were going to say South Africa, so maybe say not in South Africa. Where would you choose to live?
Yeah, well, my answer would have been South Africa. I think it's such a fantastic place. But if not South Africa, I'm quite interested. I'd like to explore Finland. I think that's a very weird and wonderful country. Quite strange. So I'd love to go there. I also love some of the political systems that they have in Finland are quite exciting, that I definitely would love to explore. So that's somewhere I'd like to stay for a little bit. Not too long, because I know the weather there is quite depressing. But I do quite enjoy my gray weather. I do enjoy rainy days. So perhaps it is the perfect place for me. But I think in excess, it could be a bit much. But yeah, Finland, I definitely would love to explore that.
Really interesting answer. If you love grey weather, I'm sure you enjoyed the Cape Town winters, with the long days.
I love it. Your cup of coffee, a nice blanket. Those are the best.
It was a great time. It was absolutely great time. But we Joburgers, we don't get that. So.
Yeah, very rare here.
We get it on days like today. It's like, it's a bit cloudy, but it's not quite there. So let's talk about reimagining South Africa through the work that you do specifically. And I guess let me start at the base. Okay, so perhaps to a person who is listening, to you speaking now, and has already been no doubt impacted by what you've said and the profound words that you've shared. What would you say is 3D printing? So if the person listening has never heard of this 3D printing or doesn't quite understand, what does that mean? I mean, what actually is 3D printing to you?
Yeah. So 3D printing at its core is the ability to produce three-dimensional objects. And the other name for 3D printing is additive manufacturing. So from the name, additive means that you're adding material, right? So the 3D printing process is one where you have a machine that deposits material in a layered fashion, hence the name additive, right? With that, you can create three-dimensional shapes. So just as an example, here's one of our last kind of client projects.
Nice.
It's IoT kind of enclosure for electronics. And if you look very closely, you'll see the layers and the lines on the actual box.
See it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so additive manufacturing or 3D printing is this process that produces these complex geometries. And what's so fascinating about the technology is that unlike your traditional manufacturing processes like CNC machining, which is what's called a subtractive manufacturing, where you remove material, you start with some block and then you remove material, which results in quite a bit of waste. With additive manufacturing, you actually have virtually no waste because you're building up exactly what you need and you don't add any unnecessary material. With that, you also get incredible design freedom, where you have virtually no design constraints. And that perhaps is one of the most exciting things for me, is the geometries you can produce are so sophisticated that we as an industry are not yet prepared for how powerful 3D printing is in terms of the kind of parts we can design.
Yeah.
As an example, if we look at rocket engines, for example, that consist of thousands of parts that have to be machined and whatever. With 3D printing, you could create one very complex geometry that has the functionality of all those 1,000 parts put together. So now you've reduced this assembly of 1,000 parts to a single complex component, which cuts your costs, it cuts your time, not to mention that these parts are often far stronger than your traditional manufacturing components. So 3D printing is the next kind of natural step in manufacturing evolution. As these processes get better, we're going to see them a lot more in industry producing parts that we use every day. And so in a nutshell, that's 3D printing, just the ability to create these three-dimensional objects in a variety of materials. So I primarily at the moment work with plastics and polymers, but then you get systems that work with ceramics, that work with metals, and that work with concrete, which we're also starting to experiment with now. So really the applications of 3D printing are just so profound and widespread.
They're endless, right? They really are endless. I mean, the potential and the impact that it could make and is already making, is really, really something we should not underestimate. And thanks for that, the description. I think it really sets the scene for what we're about to discuss. And, diving right into it, what would you say is the core vision behind Amnova Tech? Within the work that you do, what is the actual core vision of what it is that you're doing?
Yeah, so it's two main things. The first and most important, our core drive at Amnova Tech is to accelerate the transition to sustainable manufacturing. It's no secret that the climate crisis is worsening, and the recent UN reports indicate that it's in certain respects it's already too late in certain areas to transition. Some of the damage is done. So what our core is to accelerate this transition to sustainable manufacturing. What that means is producing new manufacturing processes, which at this current time have manifested themselves in the form of 3D printing, but developing these new, more sustainable ways of manufacturing that produce less waste, that are more energy efficient, and that use materials that are both environmentally sustainable, recyclable, essentially trying to produce a carbon neutral footprint when manufacturing parts. That for me is very critical. And I want to emphasize the word accelerate. By no means are we the only people doing this. We're trying to merely be a catalyst that forces all these other companies to transition to a sustainable approach. Even if in a few years' time, Amnova Tech as an entity doesn't exist, knowing that we've accelerated the transition by a few years is more than enough for me. That's our ultimate goal, is to try and transition to sustainable so we can have a carbon neutral footprint when it comes to manufacturing. So that's the first core drive of Amnova. The second core is the ethical, Afri-centric industrialization of Africa. So increasing the production capacity within Africa, increasing our global independence when it comes to production. So COVID has been a perfect example of how fragile our supply chains are. Once COVID hit, a lot of our imports were terminated, and that led to shortage in medical supplies, in production equipment, in automotive components, variety of things. So that revealed bare our dependence on importing and foreign supply chains. Not to say that that's a bad thing, but we need to have more independence, and a lot of these processes need to really be localized, because we as Africa have a huge wealth of resources and workforce as well, and it doesn't make sense how we're mining all these resources and then we export them to be processed and then we buy them back at a higher price. It absolutely makes no sense to me. So I want us to localize manufacturing and make us more independent production producers and become a global leader in manufacturing through democratizing and making these technologies more accessible, one of them being 3D printing. By no means the only technology, but the one that we're focusing on, so that we increase the local capacity for production, which subsequently will also result in a growth in economy and a growth in a lot of small to medium enterprises that start to enter the workspace. One thing that 3D printing is great at is rapid prototyping. And so that is the rapid production of test products. So if you have a product that you want to test with 3D printing, instead of taking months and hundreds of thousands of rands to do it, you can do it in a few days. For under 1,000 rand, you can test your product, which is absolutely mind-blowing. And there's been a huge barrier of entry for SMEs that want to enter the production space because they can't afford to test out their products. With 3D printing, you can test it out very quickly and affordably and reach market very quickly. And so that's what we're trying to do as part of our industrialization of Africa, is providing this conducive environment for SMEs to also start up, so they can start up their products, test them out, do test runs, test batches, and then enter the market quite quickly, so we can create employment opportunities and boost our economy as a continent. That is the second core of what we do at Amnova Tech.
Yeah, and I think, based on those two core visions, I think the impact is something which I think speaks for itself. The work that you do, and I really must commend you for doing that and for doing it very well. And would really encourage anybody listening to this to go and find out more about Amnova Tech, but we'll touch on that more towards the end. So you also spoke about the desire to democratize education as well. So firstly, what does that mean? And secondly, how are you making it a reality?
Yeah, so we're trying to both democratize and really revolutionize education. As I've mentioned earlier, the current systems are quite outdated and date back all the way to the Industrial Revolution, where the needs for society were very different to what they are now. And it's not sustainable to adopt these archaic systems and continue using them in our current society, because it's not preparing students for the world that we're entering, one that is heavily dominated by technology, and a variety of processes that students are just not exposed to. And so we want to, first of all, just change the way in which education is done. So to transition from a taught approach to a more problem-solving based learning. And so what that means is, instead of teaching students about subjects in isolation, you rather task them with problems. And in trying to solve these problems, are you exposed to the various fields like maths, history, physics, geography, English, etc. By structuring your education such that you're solving problems, the content you're learning has some context associated with it. And once there's context, that information is retained far longer than just reading something and trying to repeat it. So for example, I've used this example a few times. If we look at the drought in Cape Town that happened a few years ago, if we task students with coming up with a solution to this drought, in doing that, students are going to have to learn about the geography of Cape Town. They're going to have to learn about the history of the climate in that area. Why did a drought occur? What geographical conditions made it conducive for a drought to occur. So you learn about those facts. Then you go into, okay, let's come up with a solution. Maybe let's design a shower head that uses less water. Through that, you go through a design thinking process. You design a product, you test it out, you fail, you encounter issues, you go back to the drawing board, which is an incredibly important part, is actually failing. That's really important.
Yeah.
That's how I learned so much about 3D printing, was putting things together, seeing that they don't work, blowing things up, and then going back and trying again until you learn. That is incredibly powerful. Where nowadays mistakes are kind of condemned. I envisage an educational system that actually promotes the making of mistakes and the learning from them. And anyway, after these students would then design this product, they can then 3D print it, for example, and now they actually have something that they can hold in their hands, which has so much more value, and it sticks so much longer in this child's brain. So that's the kind of transition. We want to change from a taught approach to a problem-solving based approach. Instead of teaching students, if you look at it as an example of an engine, instead of teaching students, here's a screwdriver, here's a wrench, we use this to take off the nut from the engine. We look at the engine and say, okay, here's a nut. How do we take it off? Okay, we need a screwdriver. And then you learn about the screwdriver. So it flips the process around. So that for me is a very critical change that we need to make to develop these critical thinking abilities within our youth. On top of that, and where kind of we come in, is also introducing the 3D printing aspect, where we believe something like a 3D printer can be the tool that will enable this problem-solving based approach. And so we want to locally manufacture affordable units that we will distribute throughout the country to every school, so that students have the ability to engage with these technologies, because they're leaving into a world that's dominated by technology, but we don't know about 3D printing or AI or virtual reality or so forth. So we need to educate students on that. And 3D printing is one of the tools that could help achieve this and can assist with literacy, with problem solving, and with your other subjects, and kind of merges them together. Of course, we're still developing this process, piloting it, seeing if it works. As someone that's in the tech space, it's very easy for us to just throw technology at a problem and think it will solve it. But that is such a irresponsible way of doing things. We need to make sure that what we're doing does have an impact, and we might find that, in fact, maybe 3D printing is not the appropriate tool for this, at which point we'll then step back and focus our energies elsewhere. We'd much rather do that than invest a lot of money to just throw tech at a problem and hope it solves it. I mean, throwing 3D printers into schools is not going to solve the shortage of teachers problem. It's not going to solve the underserviced school problem. So it's just one approach that we're exploring to change education and make it more accessible and just stimulating the children a lot more so that they can interact, with these technologies and get exposed to that problem-solving based approach.
Yeah, absolutely love that. I think that's really something that we do need, to rapidly, get to as many students or school scholars as it were, as possible. And I think what 3D printing does is it brings that to life, right? It makes it tangible. It makes it visible. And so what is the South Africa that you see through the lens of the work that you do? What does that look like?
Yeah, so we want to make South Africa a global leader in producing high quality technologies. Our technologies being one of them. So we focus on developing large industrial 3D printing machines. Maybe just briefly what we actually do as Amnova is we develop 3D printing technologies for industrial applications, and at the same time we use these technologies to offer production services. So the business is essentially twofold. On the one hand, we're developing really cool and exciting tech, and on the other hand, we're using this tech to offer affordable production services to the population. Our goal is to actually anyone can use our platform and order a part and receive it within a day of ordering. That's kind of the ultimate goal. And we're gradually starting to introduce more production services until we get to a point where most of your production needs that you need on a small to medium volume scale, we could cater for throughout South Africa. So with that, what we're trying to do is, as I said, boost the environment for SMEs to flourish, and give access to these companies to test out their products and enter the market, so that we can produce more unicorns, more companies that are changing the very fabric of our economy and our society and our industries. And so we think using our technologies, that opens the door to a new generation of inspired engineers, scientists, and startups that want to make a change. And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and you're bringing that to reality, right? And I think, it's an absolute honor, to be able to actually talk about that with you and to see it, coming to life. And Denislav, very finally, before we do close, the time has just absolutely flown by. I'm not really sure where it went. But how do potential clients get in touch with you? If a potential client is listening to the show, how do they get in touch with you? How do they, say, Denislav, I'm actually interested in doing this for my business, or for something, an initiative which I'm doing, and so on. How do they get in touch?
Yeah, so they can check out our website at www.amnovatech.co.za. There you'll also find our phone number and our email address. You can also find me at denislav@amnovatech.co.za. And yeah, just send us an email, send us a call. We also have a YouTube video that's been up for about 2 years now, which is actually the main source of most of our clients. Our most recent one, we're shipping one of our first commercial units of our printers to the US. And that client actually found us through that YouTube video. So don't underestimate the power of social media and YouTube. So they can find us on our website, give us a call, and we pretty much do everything. So whether it's in agriculture or manufacturing or art and fashion, we service all those kind of industries. So reach out to us, and I'd be more than happy to assist on any of those kind of projects.
Awesome. And would definitely, vouch for that, and would encourage anybody who's interested to do that, to go to www.amnovatech.co.za. Denislav, I want to thank you so much for coming onto the show, for a really wonderful chat that we've had. I believe it has been impactful, and I think anybody who is listening to this has been impacted. I think particularly in terms of reimagining, what the future sort of manufacturing and production does look like, even the future of education. What does that look like once we're able to bring concepts and ideas rapidly, as you said, to life? And I want to thank you so much for sharing your story with us, for being a part of the Impactful Conversations community, and for coming onto the show. Really, really do appreciate your time, and I hope you've also enjoyed it as well.
Very much. Thank you so much, Tafa. It's been an honor to be on the show and to share my kind of vision for Africa. And I hope that your listeners found it useful as well. So thank you.
Absolutely, no doubt. Absolutely, no doubt. And to you, the listener, I want to thank you for taking a listen to the show. I hope that you have enjoyed it, and I hope to see you back again soon in our next episode. It's just coming out shortly as well. And if you haven't yet, please do subscribe to the platform that you are listening on. You can check out Impactful Conversations at impactfulconversations.co.za, where we have all of our episodes there, and also how to get in touch with us to give us your feedback, as well as to send through any questions. But from Denislav and myself, we want to say thank you very much, and goodbye.